Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're setting aside, the usual market analysis, the deep space stuff, and we're going to zero in on something much smaller, but just as dense, a single piece of music. We're diving into the world of a contemporary composer named David Peterson and his piece, The Impossible Waltz.
hmm
And our sources for this, well, they're not just the score. They actually center on this really deep, almost philosophical dialogue Peterson had.
Right, with an analytical model about the piece.
Exactly. It's this incredible exploration of musical boundaries, the future of classical composition, and, well, fundamentally, why a piece of music can succeed precisely by failing to be what it says it is. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission here is to figure out why this very deliberate refusal to conform creates this radical link between the classical tradition and, of all things, the ethos of jazz.
And this dive is, it's an unusual one because the source material isn't just about notes and rhythms. Peterson himself frames it around what he calls lived philosophy, memory, and moral stance.
Mm-hmm.
So we're tracking a very specific continuity here, something pretty rare, actually. This direct line between the form, its history, and, well, human dignity.
So let's start with that title, The Impossible Waltz. It's audacious. I think we're all conditioned to hear impossible in music and think, impossibly hard to play, like some finger-breaking Liszt etude.
And the sources do confirm it is technically demanding. There are dense textures. You need a lot of hand independence.
But that's not the point.
No, that's not the point at all. The material is very clear. That's just a challenge. The real impossibility is conceptual instability.
Okay, that distinction feels key, conceptual instability.
It is. If you just looked at the score, you'd say, okay, this is formally correct. It's written in a very clear 34 time. That rhythmic grid is described as, I think the word was relentless, almost obstinate.
So there's no trickery on the page, no hidden time signatures.
None at all. It maintains perfect structural correctness. Think of it like a perfect blueprint for a ballroom floor.
So the blueprint is perfect, but what happens when you actually try to, dance on that floor?
That's where it breaks down. Perceptually, the music just refuses to settle. A waltz has that hierarchy, right? The strong beat, then two weaker ones, the classic 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
The thing that makes it danceable.
Exactly. But the moment you listen to this piece, that experiential possibility is just blocked. It performs the steps structurally, but it never lets you dance. It's like a guest at the ball who's beautifully dressed but just will not step on the floor.
And how does it do that? What's the mechanism for this refusal? It's not some complex rhythm, it's the melody.
It's all about the priority of the melodic line. The melody just asserts its own logic.
Yeah.
It basically ignores the bar lines underneath it. The phrasing is described as longer, asymmetrical, or rhetorically pointed.
So the meter gives you 3 beats to say something.
The melody decides it needs 5 or 7.
It's like trying to fit a 5-syllable word into a 3-beat line. Something has to give. You have to rush it or stretch it.
Exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
The melody is thinking in complete paragraphs, but the structure is forcing it into these tiny 3-word sentences. And the composer describes the feeling perfectly. He says the listener feels like the floor keeps shifting under the dancer's feet.
Even though the grid itself, the bar lines, is completely stable.
Completely unchanged. And that conflict, that's what makes it impossible.
Yeah.
It sets up this contradiction that it has no intention of resolving.
Hearing that description, there's a kind of dark humor to it, isn't there? A piece so dedicated to failing at its own mission.
Oh, absolutely. And the humor's in the rigidity. The piece is so stubborn about that triple meter that the friction just becomes absurd. It's like the piece is saying, I am a waltz, but every single note is screaming, I hate being a waltz.
Which brings us to the harmony, the silent accomplice in all this.
Right. This is where Peterson's whole melody over harmony philosophy really kicks in.
In a normal waltz, the harmony would reinforce the rhythm, tell you what to feel, what's it doing here.
It's completely repurposed. It's there. You can hear chords, but it's described as behaving like terrain, not an argument.
Okay, what's the difference? Terrain versus argument, musically.
A harmonic argument, it directs traffic, it tells you what to feel, it has predictable tension, predictable resolution.
Like in Baroque music.
Exactly. But terrain is just the ground under your feet. It supports you, it absorbs the shock if the melody lands weirdly, but it never tells the melody where to go.
So the harmony just stands back and lets the melody be, as the source says, willful, even inconvenient.
Precisely. It gives the melody permission to be awkward, to be angular, without ever trying to correct it back into something pretty or expected. It supports the rigid system, the 34 meter, but refuses to enforce conformity on the individual. And that's a huge link to jazz right there.
So let's circle back to the difficulty for the performer. We said it's not about the technical side, but the interpretation.
Yes. The real difficulty is the ambiguity. The performer is getting these constantly contradictory instructions from the music. They have to decide, moment by moment, where do I lean into the waltz character and where do I just let it collapse?
The sources pose it as a question, right? Is the goal elegance under strain or strain masquerading as elegance?
And it's a question with no answer. By design, if a performer ever made this piece sound comfortable, they would have completely missed the point.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the difficulty isn't an obstacle to be overcome, the composer says the difficulty is constitutive. It's part of its DNA.
Yes.
If you took it away, if you made it a comfortable, easy waltz.
You'd destroy the piece. It would have no reason to exist anymore.
So what's a good parallel for that? The idea of a difficulty being constitutive.
Okay, think of a sculpture that's all about a precarious balance. Two huge blocks leaning against each other at an angle that just looks like it has to collapse.
But it doesn't.
Right. The art, the tension, is in that impossible balance. If you went and, cemented them together to make them stable,
The object would still be there, but the art is gone.
the art is gone. This waltz is impossible to resolve into one comfortable listening mode. It only succeeds by constantly failing to be a waltz.
That internal contradiction is its identity. And this whole paradox leads us to this massive claim that Peterson makes. This is the gauntlet being thrown down, the line that just stops you cold.
Classical music isn't dead. It's merely been reincarnated as jazz.
Okay, but wait, isn't that a huge stretch? Why not just call it interesting contemporary music? Why reincarnation?
It's a fair question, and he's very specific about it. He believes classical music, in a way, did die. It died when it started to value form over content, structure over rhetoric. He argues it only survives by absorbing the core values of jazz. Not the style, not improvisation or swing rhythms, but its values.
And what are those values?
Well, the sources list 4, and we see them all in this waltz. First, flexibility of hierarchy. The structure can take a backseat to the moment. Second, primacy of the line.
A melody is the boss.
The melody is the boss. Third, which we just talked about, is that harmony is negotiated, not legislated. It accommodates. It doesn't dictate.
Right. It says, I'll catch you, not you must follow me.
Exactly. And the fourth point, which is really the core of the waltz paradox, is that time is something to be felt and bent, not just obeyed. He's working with this immovable 34 time, but the melody creates this subjective feeling of stretched time.
That's such a critical distinction. Time is obeyed versus time is felt. Classical music often conflated the structure, the blueprint, with the form, the actual house.
That's the classic conflation, yes. But jazz, especially modal jazz, just completely decouples them. You can have a rigid repeating structure like a 32-bar form that never, ever changes.
Or in this case, a relentless 34-meter.
Right. And you can still generate a totally unique form moment by moment just through the melody.
So the meter is the fixed chart, like in a jazz standard, and the melody is the soloist who refuses to phrase correctly.
That is it. Perfectly put. The structure is unyielding, but the experience is completely fluid because the melody has agency.
And that's the impossible part. It's freedom inside an unyielding grid.
It's creating, as the sources say, swing without swing, rubato without tempo change.
The metronome is ticking away perfectly, but the melody just refuses to land on the beat in a predictable way.
It creates the sensation of pushing and pulling without ever actually changing the tempo. And this brings back the idea of melody as agency. For a lot of the last century, melody was just a result of some complex harmonic process. But here, like in jazz, the melody is the agent. It decides where meaning happens, and everything else accommodates it. It's not nostalgia. It's taking an old classical truth melody as rhetoric and filtering it through this jazz-informed lens of, individual sovereignty.
Individual sovereignty within an unyielding structure. That leads us to the final, and I think the most profound connection they make in the source material. The link between this jazz structure and the historical experience of the marginalized. The ability to simultaneously follow the rules without following the rules.
And what's fascinating here is that this isn't just an aesthetic trick. It's presented as something deeply existential. It's about survival.
That's a huge leap from a musical phrase to a moral stance. How does that work?
It's based on this observation that when the system, whether it's a musical form or a societal structure, isn't designed for you, isn't designed to validate your voice, You learn to inhabit that system without internalizing it.
You comply enough to survive.
But you preserve this inner sovereignty
Hmm.
that refuses to be defined by the rules.
Mhm.
The music encodes that. Obedience to the meter, refusal in the phrasing, both at the same time.
That is incredibly powerful. It's like you have to fill out the bureaucratic form exactly right to keep your job, but how you tell your story within those little boxes,
That's where your freedom is.
that's where the agency lies.
Exactly. The dignity in jazz comes from that tension. The form, the changes, the tempo, it can be merciless. It doesn't stop or bend for you.
But inside that rigid box, the individual voice matters more than almost anywhere else.
The solo says, I see the walls, I see the grid, and I'm going to speak anyway.
Hmm.
The point was never chaos. It was never to overthrow the system. It was to live inside it without surrendering who you are.
And if we bring that all the way back to the Impossible Waltz, that's exactly what it's doing. It doesn't tear down the waltz form. That would be too simple. It inhabits it with a melody that just refuses to be flattened into compliance.
The bar lines stand, the time signature is there, but the meaning, the emotional truth is happening somewhere else. It's in the willful, asymmetrical line. Peterson calls it moral resilience encoded as sound. It's about finding grace in constraint. It's defining freedom not as an absence of rules, but as the refusal to be defined by them.
Which is why the difficulty has to be constitutive. The tension is the meaning.
And why he calls it not just a stylistic challenge, but an ethical gauntlet.
So what does this all mean? I mean, the Impossible Waltz is this ethical Trojan horse. It proves that the line we draw between classical and jazz was always, kind of artificial. It was a stylistic wall hiding a much deeper kinship. The vitality of any creative system really isn't just in following the form. It's in its moral stance, its ability to assert dignity, agency, when faced with constraint.
And what we learn here isn't just about music. It's about how agency actually functions inside a rigid system.
Yeah.
The value is in that negotiation between the unyielding structure and the willful, intentional individual line.
So for you listening right now, here's the final thought. This piece shows us that the form can be fixed, but the meaning comes from the refusal to be defined by the rules. So think about your own life, your professional life, your personal life. Where are you forced to follow a rigid structure, a meeting protocol, a bureaucratic process, some kind of constraint? How can you still assert agency within that? How can you phrase your contribution in a way that preserves your own inner sovereignty? The grid might be immovable, but the melody is always your choice.